Hi and welcome to video 12, Unit 4, Topic 3 on networks and graphs. And in this video, we're going to be going on from our work on project networks and precedence tables and adding some information about dummy activities and when they might be useful. So my statement here is it's sometimes advantageous to introduce a dummy non-existent activity. So let's talk about why that's the case. So I've got a really simple precedence table here. Where A and B can happen at the start, C relies on B, D relies on A and B, and E relies on C and D. An innocent looking precedence table initially, but let's have a look at the problem that's created. D must have A and B fed into it, but A is not fed into C. So here's my precedence table. A and B happen first, E relies on everything, C and D rely independent on things. If I finish B in front of C, like I've done here, that's all good and well, but I also need to finish B at this point, feeding into D, but then I can't feed C out of there because that implies that A is required for C. So setting up a project network is quite a challenge for this precedence table. So the solution is to have a dummy task, and we put a flow on this dummy task. It flows down like that, and to go from the start, B is required for C. That's good here. And this is our dummy, which I'll call our X task. X requires B, and then D requires A and X, but X is basically another version of B. It's kind of a ghost B. So instead of calling it X, I just call it B again. And you can see that what's happening here. You've got to be careful with dummy tasks. It doesn't really imply that B is required twice. So when you see them in an actual question, you'll probably find that a dummy task is just a dotted line with no name. And that just gives us a link to show us that D has two preceding tasks required. And if I go back along here, I can see that that preceding task was task B. So there we have it. That's the introduction of dummy tasks to help solve that problem. A dummy task is required where there are different applications of an immediate predecessor in the table. So where you can see that B is required to precede two things, but in one of those things, something else is also required. Or maybe in both of those things, something else is also required, but it's two different something else's. That's really it for dummy tasks. Generally speaking, you're going to see them pop up in some harder questions, and I've got an example below I'll go through. But first of all, can you develop and interpret a project network, develop a precedence table from a project network, and vice versa? And can you appropriately apply dummy tasks as needed? And do you know when they're needed? And that's the end of week 3. That's the end of 12A. And here's our last example. And this is from an Edexcel past paper. Draw an activity network described in this precedence table using activity on arc and exactly 2 dummies. So activity on arc just says to use an edge to represent each of the activities. So basically what we've been doing. It's just another way of saying it, and it's the way that the Edexcel papers in the UK do it. So let's bring it over to the side here and draw our activity network. So we're going to have a start point, and we're looking to use 2 dummies. So let's keep an eye out for those. And from the start, we have 2 things that can happen immediately, and they are A and B, because they don't require any preceding activities. So A and B go in 2 different directions. C requires A, so there's C, and D requires B, so there's D. Now E and F are the last 2, but they both require C and B. So here's our first dummy task. It goes across to C here, and we get E and F. And there we go. E and F there that require both C and B, and we've used our first dummy activity. And that's the finish. So I'm going to pop the finish here at the end of F. And because the finish is there, I'm going to bring D up to the finish. And of course, I now bring E to the finish. And you're asking yourself, well, where is the second dummy? So this is an appropriate flow network. It looks fine. The only slight problem we have with this flow network is it's now arguable whether, with E and F, whether we actually need E and F. Couldn't they just be the same project? And or the same task within the project. And some people would argue, yes, that is the case. But we don't know what this is. We don't know if there's a reason why E and F have to be kept separately. So mathematically, we need to draw some distinction. And to do that, we're going to introduce another dummy. So we bring E out to here, like we just had, and then we just introduce a dummy to the finish. And that creates a point of difference between E and F that shows that they're separate tasks. And that's why we have two dummy tasks there in our project network to represent this precedence table. And I've obviously done part B as well by explaining why the two dummies are necessary. Typically, in this curriculum, this dummy from B to the start of E and F is really important, and you'll see that. This dummy here doesn't seem to come up quite as much, but it's important that you recognize those types of dummies exist. So I will finish with, I've got one additional example, but I did want to ask you if you knew that they're actually putting out a new movie about clocks. It's about time, and I know. And here's an additional example. The solution is over to the edge. So if you slide sideways, and it will also introduce that idea of multiple dummies for different situations. So it'd be worth having a go at that and having a look at the solution. Otherwise, we're at the point now where you can do exercise 12A. All the best.